Hello and welcome to the latest episode of Material Matters with Grant Gibson. That's me. We've been going for more than 2.5 years now, but for listeners who might be unfamiliar with all this, the idea behind the show is that I speak to a designer, maker, artist or architect about a material or technique with which they're intrinsically linked and discover how it changed their lives and careers. That said, every once in a while I break free of that self-imposed format and talk to someone with an overview of the design field. And today I'm delighted to welcome Sir John Sorrell CBE as my guest. It's a question really of where to start with his career, so here goes. John was chair of the Design Council from 1994 to 2000. He was chair of CABE, Commission for Architecture and the Built Environment, from 2004 to 2009. He was vice president of the Chartered Society of Designers from 1989 to 1992, and chairman of the Design Business Association from 1990 to 1992. He co-founded the Creative Industries Federation in 2014, stepping down as chair in 2017. Not content with any of that, he co-founded the London Design Festival in 2003, as well as the London Design Biennale in 2016, both with Ben Evans. While in 1999, he co-founded the Sorrell Foundation with his wife Frances, with the aim of inspiring creativity in young people and improving lives with good design. In 2016, he co-founded the Saturday Club Trust, which offers young people aged between 13 to 16 the opportunity to study areas such as art and design at a university for free on Saturdays. And I haven't even talked about his pioneering graphic design company that he set up with Frances in 1976. This, I guess, is a long way of saying that he's been one of the most important figures in British design for over 4 decades. John, are you there?
I am here. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. Was that reasonably accurate?
No, that was fine. That was great.
Oh, good. Good.
And that's a kind of potted history.
Yeah, it's a lot of jobs. Where are you at the moment?
I'm at home, working from home, up in Highgate, North London.
Okay. And am I right in saying this is the home that Sam Wanamaker, who's the brains behind the Globe Theatre, and Zoe Wanamaker's father, was this the house that he originally built?
Yes, indeed. Really extraordinary story. And we're very fortunate because we're in it's actually a block of flats. And he built this little block, low-rise flats in 61. And I think his aim was to create a nice flat for him to live in, one for his daughter. And the story is that he then sold off the other flats and gave the proceeds to the Globe to help make it build. And if you go to the Globe to this day, you'll see a bust in his honour in the foyer because they are indebted to him forever.
Yes. How interesting. How have you coped with the pandemic, John? Has it affected the way you work or the way you live?
Well, I certainly haven't been travelling around on tubes and buses too much. We've been working from home, both Frances and I, for the whole thing. And it's been okay. It's the same for everyone. It's been different, but you have to roll your sleeves up and get stuck in, don't you, in a different situation. I think the main thing is adaptability. You've got to be able to adapt. And I'm okay at adapting to different situations. But this has been, I have to say, completely unique.
Yes.
I haven't experienced anything like this before.
Unprecedented appears to be one of the words that's been used most in the last 12 months, I think.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, the thing I guess that's pressing you most at the moment is the London Design Biennale. It's happening at Somerset House and runs from the 1st to the 27th of June. Ez Devlin is the artistic director this year, and there's a theme of resonance. There's going to be a forest in the building's courtyard with 400 trees, I believe. What else can punters expect?
Well, this is going to be probably the most exciting Biennale we've done. We did one in 2016, one in 18, and we had to delay the one that was supposed to be in 2020 because of the pandemic. So it shifted back to this June. But it is going to run for virtually the whole of June from the 1st to the 27th. And it will be, I think, fantastic. Ez has designed this extraordinary installation for the courtyard at Somerset House, 400 plus trees in the courtyard. And it's basically the forest, which we're calling the Forest of Change, because it's all about the UN's global goals for sustainability and climate change. So it's drawing attention to this extraordinary need, this great movement, which needs to happen now, a much faster movement in changing people's attitudes towards the climate. So that's an incredibly important part of Somerset House. And there's a very strong theme of sustainability to the Biennale this year. So it isn't just the forest, it's also the countries who have stuck with us and are still going to exhibit their installations, despite everything. And we'll have about 30 countries from all different parts of the world exhibiting their installations. Most of them are doing things to do with sustainability. We've got a fantastic little exhibition which is all about adaptability because it's come out of a conversation with Chatham House, the Royal Institute of International Affairs.
Right.
And we are having a conversation with them about the fact we're kind of trying to do the same thing because they're trying to bring people together around the world to talk about policy and the way the world needs to change. We're doing the same thing with design. And so we've ended up doing a call out together, asking people to respond to the call out with their ideas for how to address some of the big crises which face the world.
So yes, I was going to say this is Design in the Age of Crisis, the installation.
This is the name of this exhibition, which sits as part of the Biennale. We've had an extraordinary over 500 submissions from, I think, 58 countries, 6 continents. And it's a mixture of professional designers, architects, product designers, members of the public, absolutely amazing mix. And those are up on our website now, but there will be an exhibition designed by Juliet Quintero in Somerset House as part of the whole show. I'm very interested in this because I think that designers are brilliant in crisis. We're not just in one crisis with a pandemic. We've also got the climate change crisis.
And an economic crisis.
We've got an economic crisis. We've got a crisis coming up which is about unemployment and work. We've got crises which are about society across the world. So I'm very interested in how we can make the point that designers are brilliant at solving problems.
Yeah. I mean, there's some fascinating looking entries. I was on your website yesterday having a look, and there's ideas that include green spaces that attach to buildings, active furniture for children in classrooms, and a workplace that takes the menstrual cycle into account, which is kind of intriguing. I think it's safe to say that over the past 20 years, design has become increasingly homogenized, and there are reasons for that. Globalization, digitization, which are part of the same thing, I guess. I mean, the success of something like DZine, which means ideas spread around the world incredibly quickly, and the rise of design festivals globally. I mean, in that context, John, I'm interested in the notion of having pavilions based around nation states. I mean, that might seem counterintuitive. Is it seeking to show that provenance still exists in design, I wonder?
Well, it's just a fact, isn't it? 20 years ago, which is actually next year will be the 20th edition of the London Design Festival. And when we founded the festival in 2003, there was the Milan Furniture Fair and a couple of other things, but there wasn't very much going on in terms of the kind of celebration we decided to do in 2003. And things have changed dramatically over the last 20 years. And the major change has been the technology, which has enabled people to talk to each other instantly all over the world. And of course, that's affected design in a huge way because people's expectations are instantaneous. So people no longer want to sort of wait a couple of weeks while you send them a fax or something, or even something by mail. Everything is instant. And so I think it's good in some ways, not so good in others, but it's very good in enabling us to reach out to designers across the world, in every country in the world, and say, have you got ideas which could improve the situation, the state that we are in everywhere in the world? So designers solving problems, for me, is an incredibly important thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm just interested to know whether the different nation states still have something individual to say.
Yes, of course they do, because they come at things from a very different direction. And they all have their own cultures, they have their own backgrounds, they have their own approaches. And this is what I find very exciting, because you get, with the kind of call out we've just done on Design in Age of Crisis, you will see for yourself when you go to Somerset House that the ideas are coming from all over the place and they're very, very different. So I'm very interested in how you, I don't like the word very much, but harness the power, if you like, of the design community, the world's design community, to address some of the big issues. If you only manage to find answers to 1 or 2 big problems a year, that would make a difference.
The Biennale is an offshoot of the London Design Festival, which you set up with Ben Evans, 2003. It's happening again in September. How's planning going for that? The last 14 months must have been kind of difficult for you, I guess.
Actually, the Biennale is not an offshoot of the festival. It's a totally separate activity.
I apologise. It's totally separate. I apologise.
It's
put me in my place.
It isn't an offshoot. It is a different thing. It's got a very different purpose. When we set the festival up, the thing I said at the opening, and I've said it every single year since, is the aim of the London Design Festival is to celebrate and promote London as the design capital of the world and as the gateway to the UK's world-class creative industries. And that remains the core idea behind it. Although I have sat in the front row at more than one design week at its opening and inauguration ceremony and heard those words being spoken from the stage, just with a different city rather than London in the sentence. What is great now that I think since we started, there's about 200 festivals or weeks started in cities across the world. Isn't that fantastic? Because we didn't have that 20 years ago. So what I'm really saying is that there is a movement across the world to recognise the part that design plays in the economy and in society, in people's lives. And it wasn't like that 20 years ago.
Well, no, can I take you back to 20 years ago? Because there's no doubt the festival's been hugely successful, but it did take a few years, I think, to establish itself. There was a kind of informal thing going on around 100% design back in the day, and the industry wasn't quite sure. Was there a moment where you thought, actually, this festival is going to work?
Yeah, absolutely. It was the first time someone said to me, instead of asking the question, is the festival happening next year? They said, can you give me the dates for next year's festival? And I knew then we cracked it.
When was that? How long did that take?
About 4 years.
Right. So it was a long-term project. You had to hold your nerve, I guess, in that case.
Well, we always have to hold our nerve. We've had to hold our nerve in the last, since the beginning of the pandemic. How long is that now? My goodness, it seems like a very long time. I think one of the key things is holding your nerve, because sometimes it takes so long for something to become established. And lots of people give up just as something is about to happen. And they give up because it's hurting so much. I was always very confident the festival would work. You know, we didn't just start it. We spent, I think, a year and a half doing the planning and preparation. We talked to everybody. We talked 100% because they were doing something which we thought was very good, and they welcomed it with open arms. And then we went out and talked to people and asked if they'd take part. But it was very small to begin with.
Yes.
And it's grown a lot.
Yes, yes.
I don't know what you were doing 20 years ago, Grant, but you...
Well, I was editing Blueprint 20 years ago, in fact.
Goodness me.
Which obviously died a death during the pandemic, unfortunately.
Well...
Because I did work on the festival for a bit. I edited the launch the guide back in the day. So, yeah. I mean, you and Ben Evans, the festival director, have worked together for nearly 20 years. I mean, what do you both bring to that particular party, John?
It's more than 20 years, actually. I think I first met him on the terrace outside the House of Commons in Westminster. And I think he was doing something political, working with a minister called Mark Fisher.
Oh, yeah.
And I was trying to persuade Mark Fisher and John Butcher, Labour and Tory, to set up an all-party group for design.
Well, he was a big proponent of design, wasn't he, Mark, back in the day?
Mark was a Labour minister responsible for design.
Yeah.
Anyway, they agreed, and so we set that up. So that was where the all-party group for design started.
Right.
And that was about, I think, 94 or 95. And then Ben did a bit of work with me at the Design Council, and he was an obvious person to talk to about doing the festival. So it is long. It's longer than 20 years.
And what are the qualities you both bring to it?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, I think Ben is... One thing I say about Ben that everybody knows, he's very brave, he's very courageous. So he'll really go all out to try and make something happen, even if it's terribly difficult. I think he's a great manager. He's very persuasive. I think that if you look at some of the things that we've achieved, I think the installation program in the festival, which is very much Ben's baby, I think is completely brilliant. And obviously, I'm a lot older than him, so I'm not that keen in working flat out every day and managing stuff. And indeed, I said to Ben at the beginning, I don't really want to manage this. And so I'm more interested in strategy. And the thing I think I like most of all is ideas.
Right.
So I love talking about ideas for the festival and indeed for the Biennale or anything else.
Yeah, yeah. Can we talk a bit about where you come from? I mean, you were born during an air raid in 1945.
Yeah, I was.
In North London.
I was born in North London during an air raid and under a Morrison shelter. They were like sort of little cages. They were indoor shelters. There were two types. This was indoors. And my parents already had two girls. My dad had been in Africa in the war for 2 years. He'd been back about a year. I came along as a late addition. It's a long story, but the sirens were going and my mother said to my father, get the midwife. And, in those days, most people had their babies at home. So my mother knew the midwife. My father ran about a mile to get her. He always sort of told a story about it, saying I ran like mad knocked on the door. The midwife opened the window upstairs. So, of course, it was pitch black because of the air raid. No one allowed to have lights on. And the midwife said, "I'll be right down." He said she came down and jumped on her bike and zoomed off and left me standing there panting. He said I had to run back, and by the time I got there, you were born.
Gosh. So your father was a milkman, I think.
He was a milkman. He was a nice, wonderful man.
Yeah, huge Arsenal fan.
Big Arsenal fan, and all the family was. He was one of 14 children, and so all his brothers were, and so were my mother was one of 11 kids, and they were all Arsenal fans. So I wasn't going to support anybody else.
There was obviously football in the house, but was there art in the house?
There wasn't a culture of art, but my father loved drawing. He liked sort of doodling. And the thing is that although, we had no money, we were a working class family. And when I was 2, we moved from this little rented flat to a council house because in those days there was a point system for getting a council house. And because I was a boy and there were 2 girls in the family, they could have had another 6 girls and wouldn't have got a council house.
Wow.
But it meant that they had to have separate bedrooms for the boy and the girls. Interesting, isn't it? The way that the rules changed, the attitudes change, the culture changes. I grew up in a council house on a council estate in Highgate, which was, working class. Everybody was poor. But actually, I have to say, everyone was absolutely great, very happy, and people worked incredibly hard.
And it seems that going to a Saturday morning art class at Hornsey School of Art when you were 14, that seemed to inform the rest of your life, really.
It was the thing that absolutely changed my life.
Was it an immediate epiphany when you walked in?
Yeah, I was extremely lucky. I was good at art. I had an art teacher called Mr. Ramsey who came up to me one day and said, "I know that you like art and I think you're good at it. Would you be interested in going to Saturday classes at Hornsey College of Art?" It was the great Hornsey College of Art of the day. And I said, yes, I'd like to try it. And I went along and I just fell in love with it in the first half hour. It was the thing that changed everything.
And you met John Hoyland when you were there, I think.
John Hoyland, he was in charge of the class.
Ah, he was your teacher. Wow.
So I was 14 and there was this guy who was obviously in charge who I thought was really old, but he was about 26 or 27. And it was John. And there were some other people who I thought weren't as old as him, but they were still old. And they were students who were about 21 or 22. When you're 14, someone 22 is quite old.
Yeah.
And they were assistants to John. There were only about 10 kids. And they were all from completely different schools. So there was a piece of social engineering going on. So they'd pick these kids out of local schools and put them together. And it was all based on, believe it or not, a government policy initiative.
This came out of Churchill's national government, I think, of the kind of war and then post-war.
Churchill's wartime cabinet, which did 2 things which really affected me. One was in the November 1944 cabinet, they decided to set up the Council of Industrial Design, which became known as the Design Council, which of course I chaired many years later. And they had this idea that after the war, they would need to improve the quality of the design of British products to trade successfully in world markets. And they were dead right. Because if you look back at the history, you look at what the Americans were doing at that time, they were zooming ahead with the quality of their design. And Britain was in trouble in that sense. And the idea was that you would get 14-year-old kids to go along to Saturday classes, hope that they liked it and hope that some of them stuck and went full-time. And indeed, when I was 15, so I'd done a year there, and they said to me one day, "Would you like to sit the exam to come to Hornsey full-time?" So I said, "What do you have to do?" And they said, "Well, just do a drawing, anything you like." So here's a piece of paper. I did the drawing.
What did you draw?
I don't remember. I'm always asked that question. I got no idea. I can't remember what I drew. And then 6 weeks later, I got a little postcard, and the postcard said, "You've been admitted to a full-time course at Hornsey College of Art. Please tick one of the boxes below to denote which course you would like to take."
Was it always going to be graphic design? You studied there from the ages of 16 to 19. Was it always more the commercial side of art that intrigued you?
Well, I'll tell you what happened. I didn't know what all these things were on the card. So when my father came home from his milk run, I said, look, Dad, I've got this. I've got into Hornsey College of Art. What do you think I should do? And he said, well, what do all these things mean? I said, I don't know. What are these things? What are things like textiles and ceramics? And we looked at them together and he said, I think you should tick that one. He said, I think it's the only one that looks like there might be any money in it. And it was the course that said commercial art. It wasn't graphic design. It was called commercial art.
Commercial art. Interesting.
But then at 16, I went there and I did everything. It was actually a classic old-fashioned foundation course where it wasn't commercial art at all. It had design in it as well as fine art and printing and everything. It was absolutely amazing. But in those days, there was a course that it was all changing. They were thinking of introducing DIP AD, which was too late for me. But I did this old-fashioned course, which ended up with a diploma. And I'm very proud of it. I can look over and see it on the wall now. National Diploma of Design.
Very good. Very good. And then, I mean, you left at 19 and you set up your first business with Chuck Goodwin before creating Newell and Sorrell with your now wife, Frances, in 1976. How did the pair of you meet?
What, Chuck or Francis?
Francis.
I met Chuck at Hornsey. I was at Hornsey with him. So we got together after we left to start a business. And we had 7 years together. It was absolutely extraordinary through the 60s. It was, absolutely amazing fun. We didn't know anything about starting a business. Didn't know anything about business at all.
So what kind of things were you designing those first 7 years?
Huge variety. It was very, very different, Grant, because I remember picking up the phone and talking to BP just out of the blue and, being invited to go along and see them. And then within a couple of months designing their exhibition stand for the Paris Air Show. That was, when I was about 20, which I did with Chuck. The 60s were sort of crazy, extraordinary network of people. You met people and then met other people. And we ended up doing an interior of a wonderful motor yacht for the Honourable Michael Pearson, which was very sort of James Bond and 60s circular revolving beds, mini mokes lifted on cranes off the deck. I designed a chess set you could play in the dark in a force-9 gale. It was crazy times. But, it took us about 6 months to find out you were supposed to send an invoice when you'd done work for someone. The reason we hadn't was why we hadn't been paid any money. It was crazy. And then I kind of, I met Francis and Chuck and I realised that we had to go out and try and find a way to make a bit of money. So we parted in terms of business, although we are still best friends. And I hope very much that I will soon be sitting down at the Delaunay having lunch with him again. I haven't seen him since the pandemic started. But Frances and I met her when I moved on from working with Chuck to working with Wolf Owens, which I did for 5 years. Thank God for Michael Wolff, one of the greatest designers in the world, an absolute genius, in my opinion.
Yeah,
absolutely. Complete genius. And he gave me a job in Wolf Owens, which I really enjoyed for the time I was there. But really, to be honest, I like working for myself. And so it was kind of only a matter of time. And I met Frances. She was a freelance illustrator and designer. And we decided to set a little business up, which we managed to get together in 76.
And you have this, from the outside looking in, John, you have this extraordinary partnership where you've both worked and lived together for however long, since 76. I can't do the maths, not a strong point. Interestingly, from my perspective, my parents did a similar thing. They've been married for forever and they work together cheek by jowl as GPs. What's the secret? What do you bring to each other's work and personal lives?
Well, it is a long time and most people don't get it, but you obviously have an experience of being at close quarters to it. And I think that it's just that we like each other.
Definitely helps.
Well, it wouldn't work if we didn't. And we really do, and we support each other. So I'm always on Frances' side and she's always on my side. And no matter what the problem is, we will approach it and solve it together, whether it's business or it's life. And it's just wonderful. And most people say, how could you possibly work with your wife? And I say to them, well, how could you possibly not? It seems to make total sense to us and always has done. I don't know if there's any more to say about it because most people don't get it.
No, it's an extraordinary thing. In terms of professionally, were you different types of designers? Was it easy to work together always?
Oh, yeah, I think so. Frances can really draw and paint, and I am very average at those things. I've always been very interested in ideas and strategy, and I'm interested in how things work and making them work. Frances is fantastic at crafts. So if you like, the craft of design is something she's absolutely wonderful at in every way. I am interested in the strategy, and I'm interested in what makes businesses and companies and organizations and governments tick, and how design plays its part in all that. And when we started our business, it was because of the experiences we'd had. I was the one who did most of the talking and all that stuff. And that's changed now completely. And the thing is, Grant, we've been running our charity now for over 20 years. And so a big chunk of our lives have been spent on that. And I say that it's the best thing I've ever done.
Yeah, we will get into that, I promise. You had this small company that you describe it as, Newell and Sorrell. I mean, it was wildly successful. I think we need to put that on the record. You had 100 staff in London and Amsterdam at one point. I mean, it seemed a very caring, creative culture that you nurtured. I remember going to a couple of your utopian nights back in the day, sometime in the late 90s, it must have been. I think I saw Andrew Rawnsley and Lloyd Grossman talk, and they were extraordinary, actually. Quite a revelation. And you did logos for the Body Shop and M&S. Did the business take long to get going? And did you always have a sense of what kind of culture you wanted to create?
It was kitchen table startup, literally, because when we started it, we didn't have any money. So it's just the two of us working from home, and we gradually grew it, and we got a little office in King's Cross in what I used to call bandit territory. It was very, very rough around King's Cross.
It was lively around there.
It was very, very lively around there. That's a good word for it. And we just gradually grew it. And dear Michael and Wally Olins, who's no longer with us, of course, Wally.
No.
When I left, they did something extremely unusual, which is they gave me 2 clients who I'd been looking after. I think they felt that the real work with those people had run its course, but one was a British Airports Authority, and Frances and I then worked with them for the next 14 years, and a company called Beryl, who were a wonderful corporation that made writing materials and arts and crafts materials. We worked for them for about another 20 years. And we kind of built our business around those 2 things. We grew it in London, and we grew the culture the way we wanted it to be. And there were 2 big things we did which made a huge difference. One was that we started when we managed to move to Primrose Hill, Utopia Village, we started a little cafe, which actually grew to become incredibly important. So it did breakfast every day, and it did lunch, highly, highly subsidised. Breakfast was free, lunch was very subsidised. And it also was the place where we were able to do our Utopian Nights programme, which you talked about. And what we believed was in feeding people's minds and bodies. We thought the business was responsible for that because a lot of the people who worked for us were young people. We worked out that lots of them didn't necessarily eat properly because they were perhaps living on their own or in a flat with a few other people. They might have gone out the night before and had a few drinks. And in the morning, they're going to be hungry. Maybe they hadn't eaten anything. So we wanted to make sure breakfast was there. So there was a kind of culture. And also Frances set up a kind of medical scheme. So we had a visiting doctor. And we had things like Tai Chi lessons. And we had a little gymnasium in the building. So we built something which was, and the Utopian Nights programme was actually about feeding people's minds. It was really great because it was a different kind of business. And we really, really cared about the people we work with. And I never talked about people working for me. I talked about I wanted to work with them. And we had some extraordinary people working for us, a lot of whom have gone on to be very successful in other businesses.
I mean, the project you did that I guess was the most controversial, and I hope you don't mind me taking you back to this, was the BA World Images livery concept and redesign. It's been fascinating rereading about it now, because it kind of feels, I don't know if you would agree with this, but it kind of feels like the start of the kind of culture wars that we feel ourselves in now. The sense of British identity and where we sit with the rest of Europe and the world too. To give a bit of background for people who maybe don't know that project, BA was attempting to be more global, more approachable, more cosmopolitan. You commissioned work from artists from around the world. So there's a diversity and a kaleidoscope of colours. And there was a kind of sense when they talk about the values of the project, I mean, they sound, if you don't mind me saying, kind of liberal, metropolitan and kind of elite, which you know, is a phrase that's popped up over the last 10, 15 years. There were 15 designs unveiled initially, and the idea was that you'd add 12 more each year until the millennium. Obviously, for most of the planes, I think with the exception of Concorde, you removed the Union Jack, and people had some people had a very strong reaction to it. Margaret Thatcher famously draped a handkerchief over the tail fin of a model at the Tory party conference. I guess 2 questions with that, John. One of which is, what are your memories of that project? Because it seems to me it was ahead of its time. But 2, did you at the time detect that there was a seed there that was maybe going to grow into Brexit and everything else we've experienced, UKIP, etc.?
Well, how long have we got? You could do a whole...
it's a podcast. We can go on for days.
You could do a whole podcast. Because the thing is, it is a very long and complicated story. And I can't do it justice really in a minute or so here, because it did have all kinds of connotations about society in Britain at the time, culture in Britain. It was, as you've recognised, political. Don't forget that Margaret Thatcher was best friends with Lord King, who had just had a few problems with a court case to do with Virgin.
Right.
British Airways had been repositioned by Virgin already, and the commission with us was an attempt to address that. There was an awful lot going on. It was very, very complicated. And what I would say about it is I think it was a fantastic piece of design. It was meant to enable British Airways to be seen as a world airline, not just a national airline.
A world airline that happened to have an HQ in Britain, I guess.
Exactly. And of course, around the world, it was absolutely greeted with delight and open arms. But in this country, it was, apart from a very, very few, very good, well-written articles about it, which actually did the proper research and got the idea of what it was trying to achieve for British Airways. Most of the press was what you might expect it to be. So you mentioned Brexit. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it seemed like a seed of something that's grown in the intervening 20 years. I found it absolutely fascinating, actually, rereading it.
Well, it's happened across the world because the move towards nationalism has become greater and greater and greater. And I think we got a little taste of it back there a very long time ago, it seems.
Yeah, well, it was. I mean, were you expecting it to be controversial at the time?
We thought it would be controversial, but we didn't expect the anger, the fury. Well, but we've seen an awful lot of that recently, haven't we? And so that was perhaps a foretaste of what was to come 20 years later.
Yes, there is a whole design thesis to be done on that project and the kind of socio-political...
I think there's been quite a few written.
histories. Yeah, probably right. Probably right. Subsequently, in 1999, there was a merger with Interbrand. You became Interbrand, Newell and Sorrell. I mean, you seemed enthusiastic at first, according to the articles I read in Design Week at the time, but you left a year later. Was it difficult to leave the company?
No, we actually stayed on for 3 years.
Right.
So we sold the business in 97 and we stayed on until 2000. The intention always was to leave because we sold the business for two main reasons. First of all, because we just didn't want to manage a big business anymore. And it's very different managing a business with, actually, it was a lot more than 100, a lot of people in America and here and in Europe. It's very different to the small business we'd started with. But most importantly, we really wanted to set up our charity. And that's what we did at the back end of the 90s. So it was all ready to run when we left. And the charity started really properly in the year 2000.
Right. I mean, let's talk about the Sorrell Foundation, which you've been itching to talk about for the last 45 minutes. I've been preventing you. Which has the aim of inspiring creativity in young people. What does the foundation do?
You've basically just said it. It's there to inspire creativity in young people. And obviously, we have skills in the world of design and in innovation, but also in business, because the kind of design business that Francis and I ran actually was all about what used to be called corporate identity. And what interested us most was what makes businesses tick. Why do they behave the way they do? Why do they make the decisions they make? How can you help them be better through their thinking and through design? And so you mentioned Body Shop. Well, we didn't design their logo. They already had that. The main thing we did with them was help them move into America.
Right.
And they didn't move into America with shops. They moved in with mail order. So what we did was design their mail order materials, which has got big competition in America, you might imagine. And what we had to do was try and create something for Body Shop in America, which looked, smelt, tasted, and felt like Body Shop shops. So that was the kind of work we did. And we took that kind of thinking into our foundation. And Francis will always say, we've used everything we ever learned in business for our charity. And we've applied that thinking to what we do in the charity. So it's a different kind of charity. And our central idea was to create the idea for something that we thought would help young people. And we would then not ask anybody permission, because if you go to people and ask for permission, they might say no. We didn't ask anyone for any money to start with, because why should they give you any to start with? What we always have done is prototype an idea, then see whether or not it works. And if it does, we then create the platform for it to move forward, and we go and see if we can get the funding to make it work. And that's what we've done with everything since we started the foundation over 20 years ago.
I mean, that in turn has led to the Saturday Club Trust that you founded in 2016. the idea of which was taken, I guess, from your own experience that we've talked about. It started with art and design and now encompasses science and engineering, fashion and business, writing and talking. Why those areas?
Just to say that the National Saturday Club, which is what it's called, actually started 12 years ago. The Saturday Club Trust came along because the club had become so huge, we needed to move it into an entity which totally focused on it. So the Sorrell Foundation goes on looking for new ideas and new projects, and the Saturday Club Trust runs what is now a 12-year-old National Saturday Club. And it started with art and design because that's what we know most about. So it was the easiest thing to do. It was more likely to work. And we prototyped that with 4 art schools around the country. It was phenomenally successful. The prototype really, really worked. And it was obvious we had to take it on. And we had a lot of people who were prepared to get involved. But what we also found out, said to each other, look, this will really work for other stuff. And the idea is to give kids what Francis calls a look in the kitchen. And you give them a look in the kitchen on a Saturday. It's obvious that you say to them, just like my art teacher said to me, you like art, don't you? Would you like to go to Saturday Club? We say that to kids, but not all kids necessarily like art and design. Not all of them necessarily have that as their destiny. So we actually believe that every child in the country should have the opportunity to attend a Saturday club of their choice between the ages of about 13 and 16. And that's a very, very, very big ambition indeed. But we know that we can't pull it off just by doing art and design. So with art and design, we added on science and engineering, and we thought we'll do something difficult for us. But we've got good friends, especially people like engineers who love design. So the Science and Engineering Club is going great. We then talked to the Fashion Council because it seemed to us it made sense to do fashion and business, and that's proving to be very successful. And we decided writing and talking made sense because the children we work with need to be able to express their ideas, and that means they've got to be able to talk about them well, and they need to be able to write about them. But watch this space, because we've got 2 more coming on stream. Believe it or not, during the pandemic, we have quietly been developing 2 clubs which will launch in the autumn.
Right.
So we have one which is going to be film and media. So you've got the news now. And
I have. I've got a scoop, haven't you?
You've got a scoop.
Doesn't happen often on our podcast.
And it is. And the other one, this came out of a conversation with Chatham House because Francis and I were talking to them there about doing a Saturday club about international affairs. And that is happening. Not quite sure what it's going to be called yet, but that will launch in the autumn as well. But it will basically about young people and what's going on in the world, international affairs, policy, diplomacy, all of that stuff. But out of that conversation came a conversation about the Biennale, which is why...
Right. Which is where it came from.
Which is why Chatham House have been doing this thing with us.
So I think I'm right in saying you've got 67 clubs at the moment in 52 locations. I mean, just really quickly, how does the Saturday Club work?
Let's say you're 13 years old, if you can cast your mind back, and someone, probably your teacher at school, says, Grant, you like art, or you like creative writing, or you like science, don't you? Would you be interested in going to a Saturday club at the local uni? So you say, so what's that about? And you say, well, you just go along and, you're taught by the tutors who are there. They're the tutors who are teaching degrees during the week. Oh, and they're helped by students who come in and act as classroom assistants. And you'll go along and there'll be up to 30 other people your age. Some of them might be a little bit older, up to 16. And you say, well, yeah, but my parents might not be able to afford it. So the teacher says to you, it's free, doesn't cost you anything. Oh, and by the way, there's no exams or tests.
Was that important, the lack of exams?
We think it's vital because it isn't school. It's complementary to school. It's an add-on. It's as well as, not instead of. And if it works well, then it is absolutely brilliant for the child, I should say, when they go back to school and do their classes, because they've got this extra learning and knowledge. But also, very importantly, Grant, we've seen this so much over the last year, the social implications of going along to do something for 2, 3, 3.5 hours on a Saturday, which you really like, which you're probably really good at, because if you like something, you're probably good at it, with people your age who all like the same thing. The social implications that are enormous, because it helps you develop socially, it helps you develop those life skills. So it's about, can it help you with your career? Can it help you with your self-confidence? Unbelievably important at that age, absolutely vital.
And there's little doubt, I don't have the figures to hand, but social mobility has been waning over the past 10, 15 years or so.
Yeah, and it's different in different parts of the country. You know, there are places in London where it's absolutely terrible. I know certain parts of London where children are literally within half an hour's tube ride off all the museums in London. They've never set foot in a museum or a gallery of any kind. You know, I can take you to a beach on the coast. I won't say where it is, where there's literally a estate where half the kids on the estate have been to the beach and the other half have never set foot in it. And there are most extraordinary things going on. So there is a kind of cultural poverty, which if you work hands-on like we do around the country with it, and we you know, if you visit some of these places, you really see things that are going on which desperately need change. So we're just trying to do a small thing which gives these young people a chance at a particular age, which we think is very, very important. Because if we think about it, you know, primary school, you go along, primary school is quite nice. There's quite a lot of fun. There's quite a lot of creativity in what happens. And then you leave there and bang, you're in the big world, you know, in the sort of rough, tough secondary school world where there's some people who are, you know, 16 years old are 6'4" and weigh about 12, 14 stone. You're a little tiny kid and it's all a bit scary and things get tough because suddenly every lesson is leading to a test. It's very, very different. And what we believe is that the Saturday Club not only helps young people develop their skills and their ability to be potentially employed, but also their social mobility and their social understanding. So we think it's a great gig. We want to make it much bigger. And it's actually, I think, by the end of this year, because obviously got to get out of the pandemic, which has affected us a bit. But I think we'll be back to where we were before the pandemic and then growing quite a lot over the next 4 or 5 years.
Do you think this government and the education system in general takes creativity seriously?
I think every government recognises the importance of creativity, but I've met every Prime Minister since Margaret Thatcher, including and since Margaret Thatcher, and I've got an insight into what they and their governments feel about design and about creativity. And it's very different across the years. I wouldn't say that any of them didn't take it seriously. I'd put it in a different way. I think it's how deeply they understand its importance and significance. That's the key, because the thing is, it's up to us in the creative industries to get the message across. And I never moan about people who don't understand design, saying, I don't really understand design. I don't get it. That's our problem in the design industry. That's our fault. That's why I founded the Creative Industries Federation, because I was fed up with people saying, why doesn't government take it seriously? Well, you know, perhaps we haven't explained it properly. Perhaps they don't understand the economic significance.
Well, there does seem to be quite often, John, and maybe you'll disagree, but a kind of disconnect between what the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department is saying, the Culture Department is saying, and then what the Education Department says. I don't think there's anything new in that. It's always been like that, hasn't it? Every government I've ever known, some of them to extraordinary lengths. So the thing is that really it is up to the people in the sector to get their message across. We've just got to get really, really good at it. And I would say to you and anyone listening that we've got to get across the economic benefits of design, of creativity, of creative thinking, of innovation. And some people are better at doing that than others. You know, I spent half my life trying to do it. There is a T-level being introduced for craft and design soon, so maybe things will change. We will see. I mean, you've chaired or been a trustee of so many organisations, John. Do you think that sometimes people forget or don't even realise that you're a groundbreaking graphic designer? And does that bother you?
I'm not terribly bothered about the design thing. I'm most interested in ideas. And I've had a lot of ideas which have worked very well, and sometimes a bit frustrating if people don't understand or recognise the genesis of something. Certainly it was something Francis and I in our business were incredibly careful to make sure that individuals in the business got credit for the work. You know, if you ask people like Dominic Lipper that. And the thing I really think I'm best at is ideas.
We've been talking a lot about design and leadership in this over the past hour. And I think it's interesting that in the last year or two, we've seen Tim Marlowe, who is creative director of the RA, take over the reins at the Design Museum, and Minnie Mole, who's worked in advertising, but more recently really came from retail, become chief executive of the Design Council. Nothing against them. I'm sure they both do excellent jobs. But is there a problem in the design world? It doesn't seem like we're creating too many leaders.
It's a really good question. It's actually quite difficult to sort of cross over. The first time I did it was with the Design Council. People, I think, were amazed that a designer had been appointed to be the chairman of the Design Council. I was actually asked a lot of questions in interviews at the time about that. And I said, well, why not? Isn't it actually pretty obvious that you would have a designer doing it? But there is this thought that designers can't do stuff like that. And actually, I believe they really can. If you look at a lot of the designers around, they really could be doing a lot of other things as well because they've got the ability to do it. And I would like to see more great designers, if you like, taking on the responsibility of things in the public sector. So I've spent a lot of years doing things in the public sector, but I've also spent a lot of years doing things in the creative sector. And it's very rewarding if you do both. It's also very interesting.
Finding somebody who's both creative and fascinated by policy is quite unusual, I would posit.
You may be right.
What are the areas that the design world needs to improve upon, John? I mean, diversity is an issue.
Yes. And one of the things I've seen is a big change in male-female gender in the sector, because I think when I was at art school and in first business with Chuck, there was mainly men. And I know now that, I don't know if you mentioned that I was chair of UAL for a while.
No, that's what I missed out, actually, earlier.
One of the things I learned there was that over 75% of their students are female. So if you think about populating the design sector, there's a very good indication that it will be a big majority female in the future. But diversity in every other way is not good. I think it will get better. I'm not complacent. It's a gradual shift, but I think has changed a lot over the last 10 to 15 years. And I think we'll see an acceleration now, and I sincerely hope that I'm right.
And our hour is well and truly up. You've been incredibly patient with all the technical difficulties we've had. Thank you. I mean, final last question. What can we expect from you in the future, John?
I'll tell you what, ask me that question when we're right out of the pandemic, because I think that we're still in this time of uncertainty with the pandemic. In the immediate future, I'll be incredibly pleased to see the Biennale at Somerset House in June and the festival in September, hopefully with all the regulations off. I anticipate some more regulations will be on in June. We'll still be doing bits of social distancing and stuff like that, but apart from that, it won't be bad. You never know, it might on the 21st be lifted completely. So in the short term, I want to see those things moving well. I want to see the Saturday Club back to where it was before the lockdown. And then after that, you better ask Frances what she thinks I'm going to be doing.
Let's all wait for lockdown to end. John, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
And to discover more about the London Design Biennale, go to londondesignbiennale.com. You can find out all about the Sorrell Foundation at thesorrellfoundation.com and the National Saturday Club at saturday-club.org. As ever, there are images from the interviews as well as little films and other things on my Instagram page, Grant on Design. And you can find all the podcasts that I've done, sign up to my newsletter and lots of other stuff at grantondesign.com. Finally, this is really important, if you've enjoyed listening and want to see this podcast flourish, then please rate and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to this from. And it would make me incredibly happy if you went to my Patreon page and made a pledge at patreon.com/Material Matters. Just so you know, I've introduced a new tier. So now for only £2.50 a month, you can receive exclusive posts, blogs and thoughts from yours truly, as well as getting access to each episode before it's published to the wider world. Material Matters is a completely independent concern, and any help you could offer would be hugely appreciated. Ultimately, you'll be helping to take the message of the importance of materials, skill, craft and design to a whole new audience. Thanks so much for listening, and please stay safe and well.